This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. We're 32 days into the state's fiscal year, but there's no sign of an approved budget. Our panel assesses where we are and what we can expect. The state treasurer has made revisions to the state health plan due to go into effect in January in hopes more hospitals will sign on. Will they? We'll talk about it, and we speculate as to what's going to happen in the gerrymandering trial that was just concluded. And as always, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of our panel, this week's panel includes Cash Michaels, one of our favorite journalists and filmmaker, Leo Daughtry, former legislator, Peg O'Connell, communications consultant, and John Hood, syndicated columnist and author. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Let's get started. We've been here before. It's been 32 days and counting since the state's new fiscal year began, and there doesn't seem to be any agreement to getting a budget passed. What we've gotten is finger-pointing back and forth between the legislature and the governor. Because of legislation passed years ago, the state continues to operate using the budget that was in effect last year. But the lack of a budget is delaying state employee and teacher pay raises, as well as some $380 million in pork barrel spending found in the budget. Leo Daughtry, you were involved in these budget negotiations for many, many years, both in the Senate and the House. And Republicans used to really complain when Democrats included these special provisions and pork barrels projects in the budget. They seem to be guilty of it themselves now. This isn't an insignificant sum. Should we be concerned about this?
Well, I think so. They complained until they got in charge. They realized that in order to keep their caucus in line, they needed to give them something in order to make sure they voted the right way and they voted for the particular leader that they wanted. And so pork barrel's been around a long time. Senator Bass Knight, for example, took millions of dollars down to his
Dare
district.
County?
Well, the whole
He made it an art
area.
form, didn't he?
So, yes, he did. And it was, I think, a good thing and a bad thing. It depends on whose ox is being gored.
Well, Peg, I was going to ask you about that, because oftentimes what happens is that, as Leo said, they will offer a spiff, pork if you will, to a legislator in order to be able to get the vote to pass the budget. It doesn't seem to be helping, however, on the veto override, does it?
Well,
Why?
no, as Leo was speaking, I was thinking, and they're doing it, they're offering big chunks of stuff to some of the Democrats that they think might vote to override the veto. But as I said last time I was on the program, the Democrats are holding. They're not being bought off by these big projects. We may lose a few, but I don't think it'll be the 7 that are needed. And, you know, one thing I will say is a big chunk of that pork is going up to Senator Berger's district. Lots of works going on up there.
Yeah, so far as it goes, John, on July 9th, Governor Cooper offered a compromise to the legislators about his Medicaid stance. He said he was going to raise teacher pay and state employee pay more, study the DHHS move to Granville County, included Medicaid expansion. The House compromise modified a little bit and introduced legislation on a modified Medicaid expansion that they said they would vote on if Cooper help them get this budget approved. But the Senate hasn't given any signs whatsoever of being willing to expand Medicaid. So we're at a stalemate. Any movement going on over there on Jones Street at all?
There is some discussion that is not public. So when you see people commenting, where's the legislature's response? Where's the governor's response? It is not radio silence, but it is a narrow cast. It's not available. That band is not available to the general public. So there's conversation going on. The basic problem is that if the debate were about simply levels of spending, this budget had this amount, this budget had a different amount, you can meet in the middle, this pay raise, that pay raise, you meet in the middle, then I think that there would be more progress. The problem is that, like it or not, Medicaid expansion for both sides is a kind of a yes or no question. And in fact, the governor has not really been clear that he would accept the Working Families, Carolina Cares type model for Medicaid. He hasn't even given on that particular. Now, fair you could say, well, the legislature hasn't given on Medicaid either. I'd simply, and I know there's disagreement on the panel, I simply do not think they can make a deal on the budget that includes the Medicaid piece.
Well, Cash, I was going to ask you about that. Governor Cooper seems to be put a flag in the ground, and this is the point, and I am going to stand here, and either we're going to have Medicaid expansion in some form, or I'm not going to approve a budget. And I start thinking about next year's an election year. Is this his campaign issue? I mean, is this a strong enough issue to take a stand on?
The governor's gotten a new toy, and the toy is he can now beat a supermajority. It no longer exists. So now he can flex his muscle where he was not able to 2 years ago when it came to a budget, and they overrided his veto. So he wants to show, I think Berger in particular, that no, I'm governor, and you're not. Well, you're not, and also, and it's an election year. I plan to run for re-election, and this is what a strong Democratic governor does.
But
and
Leo,
deal with it.
part of all of this, though, is we've got these teachers that are going to be getting pay raises, and state employees pay raises, and retirees that are going to be cost of living benefits. I mean, is this a winning issue with him?
I don't know whether it's a winning issue, but they ought to go ahead and get a budget. The fact that they are tied up about Medicaid, that program that Donnie Lambert and others are supporting, I think, has merit. And I think there ought to be some way to get in the middle and go ahead and have a budget, including teacher pay and everything.
I get the sense that he'd be willing to do that. However, he's got no assurance the Senate will even listen to it.
And there was actually a deal when that bill, and just full disclosure, I've been working on this issue, this coverage gap issue for a long time. There was a deal. The House, both the Democrats and the Republicans in the House, I think with the governor's help, got to a place where it was you vote for this, we'll vote for that, and we'll move. And then in the middle of it, even before as they were about ready to push the buttons, I was in the gallery. Senator Berger said, no way, no how. So, now you've got the governor and I think the House of Representatives on one side of this issue. They have a good plan in Carolina Cares, Working Families Act, and you have the Senate who is stonewalling on this. I'm hoping that the governor seems to be amenable to Donnie Lambert's plan. I think the numbers are going to line up, just not as quickly as I would like.
Well, and what I understand is he's not going to give in until he has some understanding that the Senate would go along with this.
Well, of course not. I mean, that would be, and that's the leverage in all
this. I want
this.
to ask John and I want to ask around the panel. Senator Harry Brown announced this week, Cash, that the state ended the fiscal year with $896 million surplus. Mm-hmm. All right. The responses to this I have seen have been pretty interesting. Harry Brown and the Republicans say this is a clear signal about how responsible they are and how well they're running things in our state, that they have an $896 million. The Democrats say this is just proof positive. You guys are trying to do things on the cheap, and you're not funding education, and you're not funding program to help people in North Carolina. I want to hear the two of y'all respond to that. John, which side are you on here?
Well, they're not going to leave $900 million just sitting. That's a misunderstanding of how budget surpluses are distributed. Much of that money will go into either savings or capital expenditure.
Yeah, I don't think anybody assumes that it was just going to be sitting there in your checking account.
I don't know. That is pretty much precisely what some of the rhetoric is. In fact, that's what Roy Cooper said during his campaign in 2016. Republicans are just letting money sit around.
Well,
we should be putting that money to work.
The root cause of it is why so much, and does it indicate we should be spending more money for education and other programs?
Well, actually, when you have more money than you need, you ought to cut taxes.
And that's exactly what happened. Cash, your take on this?
Democrats believe that with a growing state like North Carolina, you need more investments where they're needed to keep up with the growth. Improve education, improve the public university system. There are improvements that we need that for some reason haven't really happened over the last couple.
Restore some of these cuts to DHHS that they made in the budget by Peg.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, we're in a good place. I mean, you need to be wise. You need to put money in rainy day, but you also need to spend money when it's needed.
We sort of agreed $2 billion.
Arkansas.
$2 billion is a pretty good sum of money to have in reserves. Okay, so Leo, the legislature passed some stopgap legislation, which would assure we were going to be able to get federal funds, draw down federal funds, and provide for some other needs, but it didn't provide for any pay raises. And the question now is Governor Cooper going to approve that, or veto it, or just let it sit on his desk and automatically have it approved? What do you think?
I think he'll approve it, because you've got to have those drawdowns. If you don't, you'll be in a terrible shape. And as you say, the Senate is reticent to move, and so he can't just sit there with this opportunity.
Anybody disagree with that?
No.
I think it will go into place, and I further think the legislature will, if the impasse continues, they will simply run a separate pay raise bill, and dare him to veto that.
I was going to say, so here we are now in the month of August. Now, this is typically the month in which the lawmakers start trying to wind down, get bills passed so that they can get out of session. Except in some of these years that we've seen have gone into September and maybe even October. But typically this is the time of the year when they're trying to get ready for adjournment. We don't have any sense that that's going to happen anytime soon. What's going to happen? How long is it going to be before this session is going to continue? Any speculation on this?
I think the question is who's going to blink first. And second question is going to be, how long can you just sit over there and not do anything?
Who's going to blink first during an election year?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think maybe we could actually give these people some advice. This is not about blinking. It's not about who wins and how loses, except us, the people of North Carolina. These guys were all sent there, and most of them are guys right now, to do a job. Let's work it out, and then they can go home and do whatever they want,
Peg,
and we can go home
We
and do
haven't been
whatever
well
we
received when we give advice sometimes. John, what's your take on this?
Well, my advice is go home and come back in September.
When everybody's not
because
so mad.
I think there's work that they will do in September. And I think, I've said this before, I'll say it again, I think ultimately Cooper is in a weak position. The legislature doesn't have to ever pass a budget. They could just pass a few more adjustments. They could do pay raises. They could say, okay, well, you wouldn't make a deal. We would like to pass a budget. We've got some things we want to do. We want to do this tax cut. We want to make some adjustments. But we'll drop all that and just go home.
Y'all stay tuned to NC Spin, because on a coming week, we're all going to get together and sing that song that was popular in the 60s. See you See you in September. Well, we're talking about arguments and people cross-legged with each other. The deadline for hospitals and doctors to sign on to proposed health changes in the state health plan came and went, with very few hospitals signing up. This week, State Treasurer Dale Falwell announced he was sweetening the pot for reimbursements to care providers and also extending the time to sign up until Monday, August 5th. Peg, Falwell's new revisions increase payments on average to double the amount of Medicare, but we're told hospitals still aren't signing up for it. What do you think of these new proposals?
Well, I mean, when you talk about a sweetening of the pot, I think largely what he did was he expanded the definition of rural hospitals and is now messaging around our rural hospitals. So, each hospital makes the decision for themselves, and I think the proof is in the feet that aren't running to sign up. I think and you know, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I am. A big chunk of this issue is the uncompensated care that rural hospitals and big urban emergency rooms experience.
Indigent care.
Indigent care, uncompensated care, and then you have a payer mix in rural areas, which is Medicaid, Medicare, and uncompensated care. So, you know, if we want to talk about this in a broad perspective, I think the state employees' health plan should get behind the Medicaid expansion.
John, you made a
issue.
comment on a show a couple of weeks ago that this indigent care amounts to a very small percentage.
Not a very large percentage of total spending. Now, it's a somewhat larger percentage of hospital spending.
It's huge.
I think huge is exaggerating, honestly. It's not. This is hospitals have been eaten out on this particular story for 30 years. And their problem is that they have in the larger systems have very large margins. They have large reserves. They are poor mouthing, and they're using the rural hospitals as an excuse because the big hospitals that do most of the business and make most of the money don't want to give up that money. They are going to have to give up something. I'm sure they understand that, and their handling of this issue and their attacks on him and attacks on the state employees have blown up in their face.
So Falwell has taken a step, Cash. Is this enough of a step? Are we going to probably see some more of this?
Well, apparently the reaction to the step that he took is not sweet enough. They don't trust him. I think it's very clear that there's a trust issue here. And you know, when you have big money on the table as you're talking, then trust is certainly the first thing on the table with it. Do you expect to make what you were making or more than you were before?
Leo, Treasurer Falwell says, look, we've had medical and pharmaceutical costs rising over the last few years to anywhere from 5 to 9% per year. And if we keep going the way we're going right now, the state health plan is going to go broke in 4 years. We need to do something, and his clear pricing plan attempts to do that. Has he been too dogmatic about this?
I don't know. I do know this, talking about the rural hospitals, the ones that we are involved with in our law practice don't have years. They have days of money available, and that's all.
That's right.
And so they are desperate. And when they have large patient turnover and they don't get paid, now it's got to the point now where domestic lawyers, when they're trying to divide an estate, they don't even include health care.
And I understand there are 5 rural hospitals in North Carolina that are just sort of on the brink. I don't know whether you noticed or not, but down in Wilmington, New Hanover hospital down there announced it's putting itself up for sale.
Well, and that's what's going to happen. You're going to have these smaller hospitals end up as part of a larger system, and that works for a while, but there are, you know, I was looking at down memory lane, poor little Franklin. It's just a large emergency room up in Franklin County because nobody would take them on. What's happening in Randolph, same thing. And you can't continue to pass legislation or strong arm one of the big systems to take over these jeopardized hospitals.
So what's going to happen here, Cash? House Bill 184 attempted to sort of postpone and slow down this whole thing and put a study committee together to study it and postpone this implementation for a year. The House passed it. The Senate hasn't passed it. I think the question becomes who's going to be on the study committee. And you talked about trust. Can we trust that there are going to be people from both sides to be able to do it? Is that the way to go about this?
Well, in researching this, I noticed that everyone's pointing toward the legislature and saying, you solve this. You do something here and make it work because they don't trust Falwell. So let's see. Let us see. But right now, without someone getting in the middle and giving some clear direction and folks being comfortable with the fact that they're not going to lose as much money as they think, that's the only solution I can see.
Dell's taking steps here. I mean, is it enough? I mean, what's ultimately going to happen with all this, John?
I actually do think eventually there will be a deal because there has to be a deal. And as I said before, the hospital's problem is they are a well-funded, well-organized, highly unpopular group. Highly unpopular. So when they make claims, most people discount them. Well, they're probably lying. They might be right in some cases, but their credibility is just shot, and I don't think they fully understand that.
People love their local hospitals. Kind of like how they feel about their local congressman. But you know, I think that what we need to do is, I think Cash said it right, and I think John did too. There needs to sit down and discuss this.
Yeah. I think you're going to have to. You in healthcare is going to have to take over some of these rural hospitals. And it's going to cost a lot of money.
Let me switch gears here. The North Carolina gerrymandering trial is over, and it's hard to know when we're going to expect a verdict. But even so, there's a lot of speculation about what to expect. Cash, it's pretty well agreed by most people that whichever way the judges rule for this, the decision is going to be appealed and it's going to go to the Supreme Court. Is that the way you read this?
There's absolutely no question about it. And I think one of the main reasons is because both sides know that there's a lot at stake here. Whoever wins in terms of the General Assembly, whoever wins the General Assembly in 2020 controls redistricting for the next 10 years. All of this talk about having a nonpartisan blue ribbon commission to all that is great talk is not going to happen because there's too much on the line right now. The next election is too much on the line, and who is going to pass up the opportunity of drawing the voting districts for the next 10 years?
You were following this trial fairly carefully. So far as it goes, we had a situation where Thomas Hoffler's deceased Thomas Hoffler, map guru's files were revealed. We had one of their expert witnesses that was his testimony was disallowed. Could you tell anything from the way that
both parties, both sets of attorneys felt really good about the outcome? Because the plaintiffs said, well, we got the defense's witness, his testimony had to be thrown out, we have all these files. The defendant walked away saying the plaintiffs didn't meet their burden. They didn't actually specify how much partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional. How would you know? Both sides, and this happens a lot in cases where the attorneys sort of convince themselves their arguments are great. Somebody's wrong. We're going to find out soon. But I take Cash's point. The trial court decision is important, but it's not the pivotal issue. The pivotal issue is when it gets to the Supreme Court. And the interim between the verdict here and what the Supreme Court does, that's when I think redistricting reform becomes a very real possibility.
In the legislature?
Yes.
I want to ask Leo and Peg, during the course of the trial, the Republican leaders said that they followed the law. They didn't break the law. The Democrats are trying to get the courts to do for them what they can't achieve at the ballot box. And that there are reasons for not having more members in the legislature because they're not running good candidates. Now, the Democrats say that nobody's going to seriously consider running in a district when the numbers are so skewed for one party over another. Comment on that, Peg. Which one's right?
Well, I think that is true, and I think in the day, Leo was one of those people who was fortunate enough to be in a district where he could prevail. But I think, if it's drawn against you, it's hard to find a candidate and it's hard to get money.
Leo, your reaction to those charges?
I think you can draw districts because of the way computers are now that can pretty well put you in charge of the General Assembly just because you can pick up a group here and a group there. One thing I will say, if the Supreme Court of North Carolina decides, it seems to me that these gerrymandering trials have gotten political at the United States level and at the state level. So I would suspect that when it does happen, the Democrats will prevail.
I was getting ready to say, if you're good at numbers, the Democrats have a 6-1 plurality on the state Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Does this bring into what John was talking about? The Republicans in the legislature are going to say, wait a minute, we're getting ready to get it handed to us. Let's pass some independent redistricting.
You know, one would hope, even though it's 6-1, Democrats to Republican, one would hope that they would still decide it on the law. One would hope.
Yeah.
Then again, there's reality.
All right. Let's switch over and ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, tell us.
Tom, I know you've been getting comments from viewers. There's a lot of interest in this. I feel it's appropriate to comment on this at this point. The emu is still at large. That, I repeat, the Australian flightless bird.
Listen, sleepless nights.
Yes.
Sleepless nights.
But most recently, the emu apparently jumped on the hood of a car in Chapel Hill and then ran away. Now, this may have been a Green New Deal protest. We're not sure.
Peg, please tell me something I don't know.
I don't know what to say after that. So there are two big summertime meetings that legislators go to, NCSL and ALEC. The Democrats in the House are canceling their travels to NCSL next week so that they can be ready if the veto override comes up.
Leo, tell me something I don't know.
In the area of farming in our state, things are really changing. For example, just in Johnson County, our tobacco production in acreage is cut by 30%. Our sweet potato production is raised by 30%. And a lot of farmers are trying to move into the hemp business. Mm-hmm. Everything is really changing.
Looking for new crops. Cash, tell me something I don't know.
In anticipation of the 2020 elections, African American female Democrats are still leading the way in terms of all Democrats in the state as far as being the one group that votes and votes solidly.
I've got one. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a story from the New York Times that was critical of the North Carolina Children's Hospital, Memorial Children's Hospital. The Department of Health and Human Services just concluded an examination, and they are saying there are no deficiencies now. That's good news in the North Carolina Children's Hospital. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit ncspin.com or catch us on Facebook. And now you can get the NC Spin podcast or YouTube channel if you subscribe. Go to our website and you can look at it, ncspin.com. And as we always tell you, join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.